to and on queue. And we'll be posting that online to make sure that this is obviously a fair and open competition. We'll also be posting a copy of the slides online after this. So with that in mind, let's kick it off with a video greeting from Scott Stump, the Assistant Secretary for Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the Department of Education.
Hello, I'm Scott Stump, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education here at the United States Department of Education. And it's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining this webinar to introduce the 2020 Catalyzing Career and Technical Education through Pay for Success competition. You know, at Octave, we believe that high-quality career and technical education, or CTE programs, are more important than ever to help students transition successfully into a labor market and economy that has been greatly affected by COVID-19. We are delighted to support Social Finance and JFF in administering this competition, providing technical assistance and supporting the expansion of effective CTE programs. We look forward to receiving applications from Perkins-eligible CTE sites who are interested in using outcomes-based financing to scale their services. Best of luck in the competition. Hello.
Excellent. So by way of introduction, I mentioned at the top, my name is Kyle Dorn. I'm a director at Social Finance, and we are co-hosting this competition and webinar with our friends at JFF. I also have a couple of colleagues on the line as well who may jump in, Meredith Siegel and Narni Samaral. And with that, I can pass it over to Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. This is Charlotte Cahill from JFF. I will tell you later what a JFF might be, but for now, just wanted to say hi.
Excellent. So moving to the agenda for the webinar today, we're hoping to cover all the information that applicants might need to apply for this competition come application date on December 4th. So first, we'll provide an overview of the opportunity as well as our partnership with JFF, including what a JFF is. And we'll also follow that with a background on Pay for Success. Then we'll turn to the competition itself, covering the goals and some important details about the application process, eligibility, and dates. And as I mentioned, please feel free, and as Narni is mentioning right now, please feel free to put any questions that you have into the chat feature, and we'll try and answer them in real time. At the highest level, this is the overview of the competition. So we're thrilled to be partnering with JFF on this competition to select up to 2 CTE sites that are interested in exploring Pay for Success financing to scale up high quality career and technical education. So the winning applicants will receive free technical assistance, and this technical assistance is valued at $150,000 to $225,000. Within this technical assistance, we'll be conducting a feasibility study to assess the potential of using innovative outcomes-based funding to scale up career and technical education programs. And then for appropriate sites, we would move to developing a program to scale the services if it's deemed feasible. So as I mentioned up top, this is a project and competition supported by a grant from the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education, and we really appreciate their partnership and thought leadership on in this area. We'll dig into each of these areas in terms of the competition details in a bit more detail in about 10 minutes probably. But right up top, we wanted to give you the Cliff Notes version of what the competition entails. Importantly, eligible applicants, this is a key piece of what we'll be talking about. Eligible applicants must include a local education site that provides CTE programming. So this could be a school district or a nonprofit providing that programming. Importantly, the site must be Perkins eligible. And it's also possible, of course, and probable that within a Pay for Success structure that we'll get into, that multiple different entities will be partnering together. You know, so long as the primary applicant is Perkins eligible, there are a number of different formulations that make sense in these arrangements. In their proposals, applicants will need to describe the program, the outcomes and the target population. Target population here is, of course, defined in the RFP as high need, underserved youth. And we're also asking applicants to define the proposed CTE program in their application. So programs with strong evidence base and giving examples of this in the and we've given examples of this in the RFP. And Jeff, to your question, we're expecting to make 2 technical assistance grants, technical assistance awards from this competition. Tribal colleges would be eligible so long as they are Perkins eligible, which they are. Excellent. Timeline here, as I mentioned, there's an optional but encouraged letter of intent to apply due at the end of next week. We encourage this, obviously, to get an early sense of what the applicant pool might look like, and then applications themselves are due at the beginning of December 4th. This is obviously a longer time frame than some competitions, in recognition that times are chaotic right now, and everyone is reeling in response to this new educational environment that we find ourselves in. Moving into a quick introduction of our 2 organizations. Social Finance is a national nonprofit that helps our partners transform systems to focus on measurable and equitable outcomes. And when I say partners, I mean we're working with governments, service providers, and capital markets. We have offices across the country in Boston, Austin, Texas, and San Francisco. And we started in 2011, focusing on the varying tools of pay for success or outcomes-based funding. That's everywhere from outcomes rate cards to career impact bonds to social impact bonds. And I'll go into more details on what exactly those are. But importantly, at the same time, we're also helping our partners with the component pieces of pay for success that in many cases need to be pulled apart and worked on individually to either get a jurisdiction ready for one of these tools or to shore up its services to create maximum impact. And we work across issue areas, but have notably found that CTE is particularly ready for pay for success for a number of reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. We tend to think about the components of pay for success that I was mentioning in 3 buckets, and these are usually or often sequential. The first bucket of assessing and identifying strategies. So what are the opportunities to scale effective programs? This might include cost benefit analyses to really get at that core value proposition and make sure that we're keeping the lens of the target population front and center of any arrangements or structure that we're designing. And then moving into the design and implementation phase or portion of work, once there's an effective program and partners in hand, we'll work with partners to identify the right funding or financing strategy. And that could include developing performance pricing standards or helping to braid public and private capital to scale programs. In the right-hand bucket here, you'll see measuring and adapting. So this is really once an implementation starts, making sure that we have systems set up that are able to measure success and also adapt to challenges and opportunities in real time. And then throughout, obviously, programs are most effective when collaboration is front and center. So we often work with partners that span sectors and agencies and do what it takes to serve as connective tissue, as it were, throughout a collaboration and project management. Mary, to your question, the range for youth is between 7th grade and or middle school through age 24. With that, we can turn to Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. So, as I said, I work with JFF. We are also a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is focused on building out systems, and in particular, workforce development and education systems that support economic advancement for all Americans. And so we do that really through four big bodies of work. One is focused on designing evidence-based models and innovative solutions. Another is figuring out how to scale what we know works. We also work to influence policy in order to support those evidence-based practices, and we invest capital to support the development of new solutions. Next slide, please. We are, as I said, a national organization. We work across 46 states and have staff located in 3 offices in Boston, Oakland, and Washington, D.C., as well as remote staff across the country. Next slide, please. We have 3 strategic priorities for all of this designing and scaling and influencing and investing that we do. And so we first look to think about how we can have an impact on people and on helping people advance. We also look at the regional level to the development of inclusive regional economies. And part of what we're thinking about there is really the development of workforce and economic development strategies that both fuel economic growth in a region and provide opportunities for economic advancement to residents of that region. And finally, at a systems level, we're really looking to think about how we can support a redesign of education and workforce development systems to ensure that those systems are working smoothly and serving all workers and learners. Next slide, please. And we've been thinking a lot about what all of that looks like in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and have identified essentially 5 pillars, as we like to call them, for an equitable economic recovery. And so these sort of proceed from left to right in order of most immediate priorities to what we see is a little bit further out. So there's a clear immediate need to think about how we can connect the unemployed to opportunities now, and then think about how we can shape policies to build an equitable economic recovery and mobilize corporate leadership to support that, and to really drill down to think about what are high quality jobs and how can we support more Americans into getting into those jobs. We also look to technology to think about how innovation can support systems redesign and scale. And again, really sort of taking a look at, as we look to advance on the other side of this pandemic, to think about not just how do we go back to education and workforce development systems that we already knew were not equitably serving all workers and learners, and instead to think about what are the changes that we really need to make to get where we hope to go. Next slide, please. So at a little bit more granular level, what does all of that look like? I work with my main body of work is as a leader of JFF's college and career pathways work across the country. And so we work with states and regions on the design of pathways that incorporate high quality CTE programs. And so as we think about what that work looks like, both in terms of what the programs themselves look like and what JFF can do, some of the key areas of our work are helping folks think about how to get their CTE programs aligned with regional labor markets, including doing things like engaging industry partners in mapping skills and competencies to ensure that CTE programs are responsive to regional talent needs. We help build out CTE programs of study, identify high value dual credit opportunities, think about how those programs of study can seamlessly align across and bridge secondary and post-secondary education, and how we can provide advising to ensure that young people are able to make informed choices about their futures. We do a lot of work on work-based learning, and in particular, in this moment, virtual work-based learning systems design, but really thinking about how do we create high-quality work-based learning experiences and then scale them so that they are accessible to all students and are helping all students really build their professional networks and get on the road to successfully launching careers. And we know that none of that can happen without engagement across stakeholders. And so really wanting to think about how we can support regional alignment and strategic planning and intermediary organizations. And as you'll hear more about from Kyle, this is very clearly aligned with much of the Pay for Success work as we think about all the different partners that need to be at the table. And just in looking at kind of the, all of your names as you were introducing yourselves, I can see that there's a lot of kind of cross-sector interest in all of that as it is. And seeing this sort of question about examples of virtual work-based learning that I'll answer before I turn it back over to Kyle. So there are a ton of examples out there. I would say at this point, those examples are of somewhat varying quality, to be frank. And so one of the things we're helping folks think about is how do you really build out a high quality virtual work-based learning experience? But we've seen really good progress on this made by and through our work with organizations like CareerWise in Colorado. Many of you may know it's a sort of statewide youth apprenticeship program, and I saw we had some folks from Colorado on the line here. Virtual internships are another model that we're piloting, and I think a key there is really thinking about virtual internships as as we are all working remotely. I am sitting in my home right now working, right, thinking about how we can ensure that students are still entering into workplaces, whether those are virtual or not, as part of work-based learning. And with that, Kyle, I will turn it back over to you because I am tempted to go on about virtual work-based learning all day long, and we don't have time for that.
And I'm sure we would all enjoy that. Excellent. So we're going to move now into a quick background of what Pay for Success is. We'll spend 3 slides on this and then move into the competition itself and have some time for questions there. So Pay for Success and why we're excited about it. So career and technical education at its best is a collaborative exercise, as Charlotte was just saying, and that aligns very well with Pay for Success. At the broadest level, as I was mentioning earlier, Pay for Success is an umbrella term for funding and financing that focuses on outcomes rather than outputs. And why we're excited about Pay for Success as a model for expanding access to high quality CTE programming is first, that it focuses all parties on the outcomes that we care most about and ensures that we're measuring outcomes in a meaningful way. So we know that if a program is working as it's intended and can incorporate ongoing performance management to ensure success as the inevitable pandemic arises or something like that. It can also attract new private and public resources that help to scale services, services that we know work, and in turn help to achieve better outcomes for individuals. And then also ensures that service providers have access to patient longer-term capital over perhaps 5 or 6 years, which allows them to focus on scaling their programs and providing them in order to best meet the needs of the target population. And then it helps direct government dollars toward programs that work and ensures the government knows what it's getting for those dollars. Success project, the government pays for what works. If the outcomes aren't achieved, then in many formulations, the government doesn't pay the private funders back for the cost of the services. So that's sort of the broader level of why we're excited about Pay for Success, and then moving into the sort of conditions that are ripe for Pay for Success. this also has crossed over with the sorts of technical assistance that we'll be delivering to the winners of the competition. So sites that are selected in the competition will receive a fully funded feasibility study on using pay for success financing that we'll go into in a second. But on this slide, you see the main work streams or areas that we focus on in feasibility. So pay for success obviously is not good for everything. Nothing is good for everything, otherwise we'd have figured everything out. So during feasibility, we look at these 6 main areas to determine what is a good fit. Start by identifying the target population and using administrative data to refine that population that needs services and will most benefit from services. In this case, we are including a broad definition of the population to be served in the RFP on the high need underserved youth, but this will be further refined during the feasibility study. With the program model and impact, in this case, we're looking to applicants to propose an intervention during the application stage. And Charlotte will touch on what high quality CTE programs and models look like in a moment. And also provide details on the evidence behind the intervention and its potential impact. So then in addition to working closely with the service provider to understand the intervention, its evidence-based and organizational capacity to scale services, we'll develop a cost-benefit analysis of the intervention and a financial model that will inform what a pay-for-success structure could look like. And this, of course, builds on the administrative and programmatic data on the target population, the impact of the intervention itself, and the value of the outcomes that the intervention gets us, and the cost of providing services. And then as part of the feasibility study, we would focus on support from potential payers, whether it's governments or private payers, to participate in a pay for success project and provide ongoing data needed to track outcomes. So at the end of this entire process, we would, the winner will receive a sort of the study itself with a recommendation for how to best proceed within pay for success. So these are the sort of components of pay for success. I just touched on why we're excited about pay for success, and now we'll move into what it can look like in practice. And so in practice, important to note that as with any field, pay for success has evolved over time. I mentioned that pay for success can be best understood as a suite of strategies that shifts a focus from outputs to outcomes. And so within that, as we take stock of what's changed and what hasn't, the 4 core principles that are at the top of what we've observed as standard include: 1, obviously that outcomes are clear in what the intervention is, what the program is that we're talking about. 2, that data supports decision-making, that there's an active data ecosystem or system for understanding what's going on. 3, that there are cross-sector partnerships. These can be common or uncommon partnerships. And then lastly, that there's an accountability and governance structure that we know how everything is set up. Those are the principles. And then underneath here, you see some of the specific strategies. These are not all inclusive, but some of the more common funding strategies that fall within the pay for success umbrella that we've seen are a social impact bond, where governments pay impact investors if a given outcome is met. Prevention funds, where philanthropy helps government pay for outcomes. Outcomes rate cards, where prices for outcomes are set for service delivery and then an RFP is issued. Career impact bonds, sort of student-friendly income share agreement where students pay for career success. And then employer payer models, where which is similar but has employers paying for success. That's a quick overview of pay for success generally, and we can obviously go into more detail in the question and answer portion of the conversation. But for now, I'll turn it to Charlotte to describe the competition itself.
Thank you. So, as we have mentioned a couple of times, but we'll stress again here, eligible applicants for this competition are local CTE sites, and here's what that means. If you're thinking to yourself, am I a local CTE site? Maybe not. So it's number one, sort of entities, and we can talk more about those entities, but entities that are providing high quality and evidence-based CTE programs. And I'll say more in a minute about what a high quality CTE program is for our purposes, that are serving underserved high need youth. So I've seen, we have a number of folks here from post-secondary institutions, which is terrific. And just want you, many of you are in fact, right, Perkins eligible entities, which is the next requirement, and offering CTE programs. So we would just want to ensure, as you're thinking about this, that you are focused on programming that is serving youth. We know that community colleges serve a wide range of folks, and so emphasis here is on youth. And that said, right, it does not necessarily need to be a secondary institution here. And so eligibility for Perkins funding, as we've mentioned, and this work is really aligned with all of the provisions of Perkins 5. So there's a nice opportunity here to really think about how to accelerate the work that you already have underway for your Perkins funding. And then finally, we are asking that folks apply with the support of a potential outcomes payer. They do not have to have signed their name in blood necessarily saying that they will be an outcomes payer, but to the extent to which you are able to apply with a potential payer that has demonstrated some interest and understanding of this, that is very, very welcome and encouraged. And we can say more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So, what is high quality CTE? And this is a set of criteria that has been established by Octay and is, I will say in full disclosure, very well aligned with the way that I talk about pathways as JFF, as my team talks about pathways as JFF does our work across the country. And so high quality CTE is aligned with regional labor markets. It's really preparing young people for careers in in-demand industries and providing students with occupations about what those industries are, including offering a range of career exploration activities. We know that for many young people, right, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't necessarily have access to information about all of the possible careers available to them. High quality CTE programs should embed opportunities for students to earn industry recognized credentials, again, in high demand occupations that are not just high demand, but also offer a promise of living wages. High quality CTE should prepare students with a range of skills. So technical skills, yes, absolutely, but also employability skills, and also really thinking about what are those core academic skills that students can develop through career-focused learning. Students should have opportunities to earn academic credit and post-secondary credit in their high school career and technical education courses. And so the post-secondary credit would most oftenly be earned through dual credit, although other models I'm happy to talk about more. Work-based learning is a key component of high quality CTE. And high quality CTE should again be thinking about serving those underserved high need youth and providing support services to ensure that students have equitable access to those programs, as well as opportunities to develop leadership skills. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Kyle to talk us through a little bit more what all of this would look like in reality.
Absolutely. So keeping in mind the high-level competition goals here, obviously applicant structures can look very different, but the overall goal, as Charlotte was just touching on, is to expand high-quality career and technical education through pay for success. The way that we'll do that is by selecting up to 2 sites in this competition And then for each of those sites, working with them in two potential phases. First, the definite phase of feasibility studies, which I discussed previously, and then transaction structuring. And we can sort of view how this fits into a broader pay for success structuring sequence in the next slide here. So here, let's talk a little bit about what a pathway to a pay for success transaction or project looks like. Starting on the left-hand portion of the slide with the landscape study, this would be identifying issue areas or policy priorities that could be targeted within a pay for success project. In this case, our projects are already sort of identified by the issue area, by career and technical education, and by policy priorities, sort of academic and professional outcomes for high needs, underserved youth. So our work begins with this dotted orange triangle and the orange chevron with feasibility. In this phase, we, as I mentioned, assess the potential for using pay for success financing to address a specific issue in a particular geography, and this can be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4 months. Once we complete feasibility and all of the project partners are committed to moving forward with developing a pay for success project, we would move into project development or sort of transaction structuring. And this can take, from 4 to 6 months or longer, depending on the partners at hand and what the conversations look like. This includes the work needed to develop a pay for success project and launch services. And that's when we would shift into the execution chevron on the right-hand side, delivering services and moving to managing results, that sort of continuous improvement framework and performance management that we've been touching on. And I'll just reiterate once more that this competition that Charlotte and I are speaking to today is focused really on this dotted orange box here, feasibility, project development, and capacity building as needed. We wanted to get into a little bit of what this means for winning applicants. So we're targeting the feasibility study to take 4 to 5 months. And it does require significant inputs from the service provider slash local CTE site and project partners. This can include providing programmatic data, participating in likely virtual site visits to share information about the program, the intervention, and the landscape, and then also participating in regular working group meetings and ongoing decision making over that 4 to 5 month period. The pay for success project development timeline depends on a number of factors, including this level of engagement from project partners. Engagement in project development can include sharing, again, programmatic and administrative data, incorporating capacity building from our team as that's needed, working through key decisions, and these decisions might be around operations planning, referral pipelines to your program, and evaluation methodology and the like. And then participating in any other decisions as they arise throughout the project development process. Overall, our sense humbly is that this is a great opportunity to experientially embark on the pay for success journey and understand how pay for success works, how to put a pay for success project together, and also to get to know other project partners in the community. But we do want to be clear-eyed about the real-time commitment from each project partner that this does take in order to produce a successful project. And let's go into a couple of examples. The first thing I'll say about these examples is that the diagrams look more complicated than they actually are. We wanted to lift up some potential structures or how display sort of how partners can interact in different pay for success arrangements. These are also detailed in the RFP, and we can of course go into more detail in the question and answer period. In this example, a school district and the State Department of Education apply together Both identify the program that they want to scale, and in this case, a career academy model that the district has already piloted, and then identify who they're planning to serve and what outcomes they want to achieve. The school district is the provider or local CTE sites fulfilling that eligibility criterion, and then the State Department of Education applies as the potential outcomes payer that will dedicate resources to pay for improved outcomes. And in this case, the State Department of Education wouldn't have to be the only outcomes payer. They could share costs with the district, for example, or bring in an employer who's interested in seeing improved graduation rates. But in order to apply, there should be at least a lead on a potential outcomes payer. And Christopher, you had asked, how do you find potential outcomes payers and what that actually means? And I could use a little bit more clarity on what the second part of your question means. But in terms of finding potential outcomes payers, what we advise folks is to sort of look at who value is accruing for. So improved outcomes in career and technical education obviously helps the local employer ecosystem. It helps the kind of secondary and post-secondary education ecosystem and others. And it involves conversations with folks who you're probably already having conversations with, and people who would be interested in driving outcomes with more with this focus on pay for success. Charlotte, anything to add to that question, or Meredith or Narni, you want to pop in?
Sure. No, so I agree with that. I think as we think about potential outcomes payers, it's really a matter of thinking about who else has a stake in ensuring that students are completing high quality CTE programs. So we think about, whether it's state agencies or whether it's employers that really are trying to build a talent pipeline as a couple of possible examples. But really thinking about, who benefits at the end of the day if students are completing high quality CTE programs. And then just to kind of speak to the second part of this question about industries and job titles, I think, there are a couple of things that I would say there. So first of all, we fully recognize and see all the time that BLS job titles do not really keep up with rapidly changing industries. And yes, like drones, aerial robotics are absolutely in that category. And I think there are a couple of things that you could keep in mind there. And one is pulling out occupations that are relevant to that industry, but not necessarily traditionally classified within it. So if you think about, drones, then you're looking at engineers as an example of an occupation that exists and, is not flagged anywhere drone engineer, but you can sort of draw some inferences. The other thing I would say is that traditional LMI is only one way of getting at that. So traditional LMI would be federal state data that uses those traditional ONET titles. The other way you can look at this is by thinking about real-time LMI. So Burning Glass and Help Wanted Online are two examples of real-time LMI providers. And what they do is look at existing job ads, which get you a little bit closer to understanding the current state of an industry. And finally, in thinking about kind of labor market alignment, the other piece you can consider is pulling data that's not traditional LMI, but instead talking directly to industry partners and learning from them and gathering data that way. And yes, I see that, and absolutely. So LMI, for Perkins decisions and the comprehensive local needs assessments and all of those things for which you need LMI, as something that we've seen lots of folks lean into in lots of states, including California, is some of that real-time LMI that I was talking about.
And thanks, Charlotte. And Jim, to your question about examples distinguishing outcomes from outputs, I think outputs would be something like number of hours in a program, number of students, or some of these kind of service delivery elements. And then outcomes are what's actually done with, you know, what results from that service delivery. So it could be employment rates a year after a program, or you know, salary increase that results from a program after X number of years. I'll quickly go through two more examples, and then perhaps we can have a broader conversation. Example applicant number 2. In this example, an employer payer partners with a local CTE site. And in this case, the company, the employer, is willing to pay if a Pathways Collaborative expands to the high schools near the company. For example, that might be part of the value proposition, or the, you know, the value that the company is deriving from this. When the collaborative and the company apply together, the collaborative, of course, would be the lead applicant here. And then quickly on to the next example applicant, a technical college. This is an example of a little bit of a different iteration or different formulation of Pay for Success. A technical college looking to create an income share agreement, or what we might term a career impact bond at social finance. Career impact bonds focus specifically on upskilling low-income and underserved learners, and they also fund wraparound supports, and generally has student-friendly terms. So in this instance, technical college is the lead applicant, and should have knowledge that students are interested in this type of arrangement, as they are effectively serving as the payer in some senses. Excellent. Let's move to the logistics, the application itself, that Charlotte can talk to, and then in a couple of slides we can have the broader question and answer portion.
Yeah, and I will run through this quickly. This is all sort of information that's also in the RFP that's available online, but just to hit a couple of key points as we think about the required application materials. So it's essentially, you know, an executive summary, a proposal narrative, and some required and optional appendices. And the executive summary is exactly what it sounds like on the box, so I won't say more about that. On the proposal narrative, something I would just, you know, say to all of you is we have these suggested word counts in here, and the idea behind the word counts is not to make your lives more difficult, but instead to give you a sense of the level and detail of the information that we're really asking for here. So we know that, as you know, we ask you to talk about, like, what is the, you know, what does your CTE program look like? Many of you could probably go on at great length about that. And I think it's really just kind of hitting some of the, you know, key points about this, about each of these. And then on the appendices, you'll see that we have the sort of required Appendix A, and a big piece of what we're looking for there is, again, an indication that, you know, this is an application that really represents a cross-sector partnership. And then with Appendix B, this is optional, but as you all have probably gathered by now, we are very keen on thinking about evidence and outcomes as part of this work. And so if you do have any assessment or evaluation of the high quality CTE program that you're proposing, we would love to have any information on that that you can provide us with. So we recognize that not all CTE programs do have evaluations that have been completed, but if so, very eager to see those. Next slide, please. And so the next slide just kind of, you know, gives a little bit of a breakdown of the, you know, scoring criteria, including the points assigned to each section, and kind of a high level view of the rubric for each section. A couple of things to note here. And I see the question about policy in the partners and policy section. And, you know, as we think about policy, I think there's both kind of the big P and little p policies. So we could be thinking about state policies, whether those are kind of statutory or legislative or what have you, that you would identify as supportive of your high quality CTE program. For example, maybe your state has a really great policy on dual credit. I saw some folks here from Texas. Texas has really strong dual credit policies. So things like that that might be, you know, supportive of your program. I think there's also then policy at the institutional level. And so you could also talk about that at a local level. You know, we have, you know, our partner college has a really strong dual credit policy in place. So both of those could fit into the policy category. And the other thing I would just flag here is, you know, as you're thinking about the high quality CTE program that you'd like to propose, we would of course love to hear more about that. And that crosses over to some extent both the program quality and the provider capacity and commitment sections. And, you know, would really encourage you to think about proposing CTE programs here that are underway in some form, and, you know, that you are thinking about how best to scale these programs or expand them to serve more students, rather than building something from the ground up. But as Kyle has mentioned, we are ready, willing, and able to support both on sort of thinking through some of the details of the pay for success elements, if, you know, with the awardee who receives technical assistance in this feasibility study. So we're prepared to think through some pay for success elements and some of the elements of the high quality CTE program itself with an awardee. And lastly, just a quick word about the challenges and risks. That there's a recognition on our part that what we are talking about doing will be challenging. And so happy to, you know, are really curious for your thinking about where do you anticipate that you'll run into some challenges or some risks that need to be mitigated in this work. And with that, next slide, please. Just a really quick overview of the timeline. You've already seen this. We are now, as of 10 minutes from now, we will be through the first two bullets on the timeline. And again, we have an optional intent to apply due at the end of next week. That's really just a kind of your name, your email address, and a brief paragraph. So not a huge lift and really helpful for us if you're able to do it. And with a final proposal deadline of December 4th. And with that, I think we would love to throw it open to any questions that you all have that we haven't addressed yet.
From RU has a question that reads, aside from working with social finance and JFF through the process, are there other commitments and responsibilities that would be held to, such as evaluations, reporting, et cetera? I think, you know, there's no formal reporting worked into the RFP or the expectations there. I think what we would be doing is relying on the feasibility study that comes out of that first phase of the project to effectively serve as that functional report or evaluation from that period. And then similarly, out of the transaction structuring, the transaction itself would serve as that report. And then we as social finance would be putting together a sort of synopsis of how the engagement went. Any other thoughts on that, Charlotte, Narni, Meredith?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah. Are there financial or services matching requirements from Christopher? Christopher, no, there are no explicit requirements. We do encourage, as you've heard throughout the webinar today, we encourage a partnership with a potential outcomes payer. As Charlotte said, no need for a signature in blood, but that's what we're primarily looking for there. And let's see, Jeremy, you had asked, you had said, thanks for the technical college example. I didn't see a budget section in your presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean there? Great, so then we have a question from Lori. What does the grant budget component include? Let me just go back to that slide. And Narni, I believe we have the ability to turn people on, take them off mute if we want to get a little bit more detail on that. Lori, if you have a specific part that you're referring to with the grant budget, or if anyone else knows exactly what this is referring to, that would be great. Jay had asked, please share a little bit about how many total grants will be awarded, and are there regional targets for funding? The total technical assistance awards is 2 within this round, and there are no regional targets for funding. And it looks like we have Lori on. Lori, you had asked, what does the grant budget component include?
Yeah,
you want to elaborate a little bit?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so in other US DOE grants that we have applied for, we are asked to submit a budget for, to be able to receive those funds back. And I just didn't know if there was a budget component to this application because I didn't see that included. Mm-hmm. So just wanted to check.
Great. Yeah, so there's no budget component. And I think part of the distinction there is this is a technical assistance award that social finance and JFF would be partnering with the winning applicant for a period of months, as opposed to sending a grant, a dollar grant your way.
Yeah, so basically the district, if I'm from a school district, would not receive any funding. That funding would go to pay for the technical assistance to the 2 entities. To
say that one more time, Lori.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Yeah, so there's no monetary award here. It's a technical assistance award, and with the sort of idea of conducting this feasibility study and helping to think through pay for success possibilities.
Thank you. It's been very helpful.
Yep.
I know there have been a couple of questions raised about the budget, and there is not a specific budget template or formal budget request. That said, when you look in the RFP in section 4, we do ask in 4D for an estimated cost per participant for the proposed program, supported by an explanation of the methodology used to calculate that cost. And a big part of that is just helping us to understand the basic financial model behind the program that you plan to offer. Again, no specific template that you need to use to submit that, but we do encourage you to think through what the budget would look like and to present that in a way that we'll be able to understand your financial thinking as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Excellent. We have about 3 more minutes, and I think 2 or 3 more questions. Christopher had asked if you have industry advisory boards, can this play a role in this process? This is where I would get letters of support. And I would say wholeheartedly yes. You know, I think that would be an excellent place to kind of show and have the collaborative nature of Pay for Success come to the forefront. And then Paul had said, I saw that this grant assists students in need. Is there a percentage of students who receive assistance for food at schools, 50% low income, 75% low income, or is this not a factor? I believe, and Narni can check me on this, or Meredith, that we have a definition for high need underserved youth in the RFP, and that's what we would go. That's what we would go to. I don't have that in front of mind right now. And Narni is helpfully telling me that there's no required percentage of students that must meet the Perkins definition of special populations, but please note that projects must focus on underserved high need youth, and special populations make up a part of that definition. So when scoring applications, those that propose to target underserved high need youth may score higher on the selection criterion, on that particular selection criterion used by application reviewers. And we point to the RFP rubric for more detailed information there, but the takeaway there is that no percentage is required.
And I believe maybe I'm unmuted. I must be. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and I think you've answered most of my question. I did put it in the Q&A, but I think with all the other questions, so it really does sound like to me, if I'm understanding correctly, it really is better to look at something you already have underway versus something brand new, because you're not, it is just technical assistance. You're not getting any grant funding to develop a program or to pay for its design. That would come from an outside payer. If you got someone on the outside, an employer, someone else who's willing to pay you after the fact, but there's nothing up front to help you with that, correct?
Right, and that sort of speaks to the benefit of Pay for Success here. You know, the award is helping with that sort of mid-life cycle or early to mid-life cycle program that's looking to scale. So it's most ideally a successful program that already exists and could use some capital to scale. And what this award is doing is not providing that capital right now, but helping to set up the Pay for Success infrastructure and system so that a site is well positioned to leverage that kind of financing and funding moving forward. Michael had asked, could the potential outside payer be a corporate philanthropy? Oh, and Narni says, yes, absolutely. And agreed on the ER versus OR confusion. We have very distinct schools of thought within social finance itself. Excellent. We are in fact a minute over. Please feel free to drop any additional questions into the chat box, or we have an email address up on our website, and we'll be posting a questions and answers document that includes the questions from this conversation from the last webinar, as well as any offhand comments that we've had. Obviously, this is a fair and open competition, and we look forward to sharing all information equally with everyone. We really deeply appreciate everyone's interest and participation in the webinar today, and we're looking forward to hopefully seeing some letters of intent next week and some applications in early December, and working together hand in hand with two sites with this Technical Assistance Award. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.